Welcome, Diva family, to episode lucky 13 of Psychedelic Divas. And today we are indeed lucky to have one of my dear sisters as our guest. Cathy Coleman is probably best known to the world as my teacher, Ralph Metzner's wife, for 31 years. But to me, she is so much more. Friend, confidant, personal astrologer, psychedelic sister. I first met Cathy 25 years ago in 2000 at an ayahuasca conference in San Francisco that Ralph produced in conjunction with CIIS. And Ralph was already my teacher at that point, but it was my first introduction to Cathy, as well as their young daughter, Sophia, who was 10 at the time. I remember how exciting that conference was. I had been to a few psychedelic conferences already. In fact, I had just come back from the epic Palenque Ethnobotanical Conference, co-created by Terence McKenna. But those other conferences were somewhat underground, not broadly publicized like this ayahuasca conference, which was large, professional, and very public. And it was exciting to be so above ground and in public with so many psychedelic friends. And I watched as Cathy helped Ralph orchestrate many of the planning details. Over the last 25 years, Cathy and I have had the pleasure of each other's company in many, many venues, both public and private. And we soon developed a close relationship that I cherish to this day. 15 years ago, we were both blessed to be invited to a private psychedelic women's circle that certainly changed my life over the 12 years of its existence. So let me share Cathy's bio with you so you can understand, as I do, how much in service she is. Cathy Coleman, PhD, was Ralph Metzner's wife of 31 years. She worked at the California Institute of Integral Studies, CIIS, as Director of Student Services and later Dean of Students when Ralph was Academic Dean and Professor. Cathy later worked as Executive Director of EarthRise Retreat Center at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, as President of Kepler College of Astrological Arts and Sciences, and with CIIS's Center for Psychedelic-Assisted Therapies and Research. She was co-founder with Ralph Metzner and is a current board member of the Green Earth Foundation. She is also a professional consulting astrologer and the author of this book. Ralph Metzner, Explorer of Consciousness, The Life and Legacy of a Psychedelic Pioneer. Welcome, Cathy, to Psychedelic Divas. It is such a pleasure to have you here.
Great. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I mean, there are 25 years and we've known each other. So there are obviously so many different beginnings where we could start. But I would like to start with your decision to get your PhD at CIIS, the California Institute of Integral Studies, where you ended up meeting Ralph. What led you to, first of all, wanting to get that PhD, and why CIIS?
Well, I think first, I went to graduate school at Washington State University to get my master's degree after after my first marriage ended, and it was right after Peace Corps, so it was a whole different trajectory, and I had maybe 8 or 9 years since I'd been in college, and I really loved graduate school, so that was sort of a surprise, and I think I just wanted to keep on learning, and so because I felt really engaged, excited, I loved academia, I decided I want to go to get a PhD. And so I didn't know anything about the California Institute of Integral Studies. I was applying to traditional schools. I mean, just to schools with counseling programs throughout the country. And I wasn't really applying to them yet. I was just looking at them. And I got kind of violently ill as I was typing out these letters, and I knew that something was off. And so I walked around my house and I thought, well, what do I really want to do? I really wanted to study psychology with a spiritual perspective. So I wrote to a number of people who authored articles around psychology and spirituality, and that's how I found the California Institute of Integral Studies. So, I mean, it was both a decision. I wanted to get a PhD in psychology, but it was also that I really wanted to go to a school, a graduate school with a spiritual kind of East-West perspective.
I've never heard that part about you were getting ill typing out or looking into, that's so that so speaks to who you are and you being in tune with your body and your like something's off instead of just like, oh, maybe I, ate something wrong. No, you knew something was off and you stopped. I mean, I love that inner knowing. And how old were you at that point?
I was like 28.
Nice. That's that's young for that level of
Yeah.
awareness. So, okay, all right. So you keep going. You found CIIS.
Yes. And so then actually there's another little piece to that story that's very interesting. I'd actually gone to the college library and had gone to the Peterson's Guide of all the schools in the country, and I was going down them with my finger, and my finger stopped on the California Institute of Asian Studies. And I can remember standing in that library thinking, California Institute of Asian Studies. Well, I don't, it's not Asian studies I want to study, so I guess this isn't it. But at that moment in time, the California Institute of Asian Studies was becoming the California Institute of Integral Studies. So it
Wow.
ties into the whole, story.
Cathy, your guides were strong at a very young age.
So anyway, then I, you know, applied, I came down to visit, I made plans to move as soon as I was finished with my master's, and I had I'd actually looked at the school bulletin board and had my apartment arranged before I came. And so I drove into San Francisco and pulled up at the apartment, and it was with another student, another CIS student,
Mhm.
and she was stomping around the kitchen. I never met her before, so this is my first meeting with her. She was stomping around the kitchen, and she just received her grades from CIS, and her words were, and these were the first words I heard in San Francisco. That damn Ralph Metzner. That's, and she said, "I've never had a B in my life," and she'd gotten a B plus. I thought, well, it's probably about time. But anyway, that was also pretty funny that it was the first thing I heard actually when I got to San Francisco. So
All right, so pretty much like blinking neon signs towards your, eventual future. But um, tell us a little bit about, how you first engaged with Ralph at CIS, how you got to know him there.
Well, so I was in the counseling psychology program for a year, and then after about a year, I really wanted to be in the East-West psychology program, but it it didn't lead to a counseling practice or a license. So that was a sort of a big decision, and but they were the courses I really wanted to take. And Ralph had designed that program, and so I had another amazing epiphany with around that decision, and so I ended up changing programs, and then I had quite a few classes with him. I had about 7 classes with Ralph, um, and basically, it's like we were interested in the same thing in Eastern and Western thought and psychology and spirituality and astrology, and but he was kind of shy. He was very professorial and very shy. It's not like we had a lot of you know water cooler conversations or anything. And then but then after I'd been a student there for a year, I started working there. So basically, I was working in the administrative side, student services, and he was the academic dean. And the school was very small. I mean, we had 9 staff people at that time, and so I had a lot of interaction with him just academically. So he kind of got to know how I could manage, just sort of the executive function of everyday life, I guess. And and then there was that fateful day that he just invited me for lunch, and I thought
You write
it
about you
was
write about this in the book. This was very unexpected. This was not how Ralph rolled. So he asked you to lunch.
right. And that wasn't how he rolled. He didn't really ever take time to go to lunch with anybody. I mean, he just time off, for frivolous things was not his MO. So I did think it was kind of strange. I thought, wow, this is interesting. And we went off for lunch and we had lunch, and then we were walking back to the Institute, and he just said, I want to be in a relationship with you. So it was
Now,
kind of,
what was odd about that at the time, Cathy?
well, it was kind of like, I've thought about it since. It's almost like an arranged marriage. It was like nothing and then everything.
Yeah, but
There's nothing
weren't
leading up.
you married at the
Oh yes.
time?
And I was married and
Oh,
he
yes.
was, with another person. That made it extra odd and extra difficult. It wasn't like we were both just free agents exactly. So we had a lot of disentangling to do. Yeah.
And you took some time. I think you said you took a day before you were like, you walked into his office and were like, okay,
Yeah.
yes. What was that? What went into that day?
Well, it's funny when he first asked me, I said, I got this image of this flashing yellow light. It just flashed through my mind. And I said, oh, I see a flashing yellow light. I mean, I didn't even think about it. I just blurted it out. And he said, well, that means proceed with caution. And then I called my best friend and I just said, we have to meet for dinner. So I just processed it with him. And I mean, kind of that was really pivotal. I just processed it and I kind of knew that I, I mean, there was a part of me, I used to sit in staff meetings and somehow I used to think I was kind of going to be with him somehow, but it wasn't
Mm.
like there was an attraction or a lust or anything. And it was so far from our everyday reality. It was just a vague knowing. So, but in some ways it wasn't that surprising.
It's one of those preordained stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about the book because it covers the vastness of Ralph's life, so we can go anywhere with it. But tell us how the book came into being.
Well, I'd always thought, it's sort of typical. I mean, for academic people with, with a big academic life to have festschrifts written by them. And usually
So
it's
what is
instigated. A
I
festschrift is like
yeah.
it's a German word, and it's basically usually instigated by a fellow colleague, and then there are academic articles written about that person's work usually. And usually it's a much more academic kind of publication. And so, but I thought, he should have a press shrift, but it never came about. I mean, it takes somebody to actually organize that and do it. And so, but then after he died, Alan Levin, well, there were a number of people who, spoke at his memorial, including Alan Levin. And Alan sent me the transcript of his lecture, or his lecture. I mean, his not his lecture at the memorial, but it was like more just his talk. And so I thought, well, this is really good. I should publish this somehow. So there was that seed planted, and then shortly thereafter, a man in Germany who knew Ralph suggested to me, he wrote to me and suggested that I do something like this. So I put the two things together and I thought, okay, it kind of dovetailed with what I thought. And then I put it out to the Green Earth Foundation newsletter and just said, I have this idea. Is anybody interested in writing? And about 80 or 90 people wrote to me and said, yes, they wanted to. I mean, just with my one putting it out there. So,
I said yes.
so it was kind of an amazing response.
So this book it has contributions from so many psychedelic luminaries. So Stan Groff, Rick Doblin, Dennis McKenna, Charlie Grobe, Christian Rech. So I know you were a big part of creating community and connection with these people and so many others who've already passed. I know people can get the book and they can read everybody's contributions. I want to know, do you have any noteworthy stories that you can share about, those at-home dining table conversations because these people were your friends. This was your community.
Um, well, it's a very interesting question because, uh, I mean, it's in some ways I could probably pull up those memories, but I would say my basic MO with those dinner parties was I was full on trying to facilitate connections.
Yes.
So I was Virgo that I am. I was sort of, I'd say my role was I was going, I want the most to happen out of this. I want Ralph to have great conversations. I want there to be great conversations. I was like, trying to serve the food, etc., in the most efficient, non-interruptive way possible. So that, and so mostly I was a little bit invisible in that sense. Just, I mean, I wasn't, it's just like I wasn't the center of attention, which was fine. That was fine. Was my intention. Sometimes there were things that I would think, oh my gosh, I wish I had a tape recorder. I wish there was a tape recorder on because this is really amazing and I wish it could be captured. So there was a lot of that, but it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't appropriate
That's right.
at a dinner party. So, I do remember one really special time that Ram Dass came to dinner, and it was after his stroke.
Mhm.
So he had to, he had his wheelchair, and we had to um, kind of create this makeshift ramp with a couple of boards down. We only have a couple of steps up to our house, but those couple of steps we had to maneuver that wheelchair and get him in the house and all that. So it's kind of a rigmarole, but it was a great dinner with Ram Dass and Michael Harner and Michael and Sandra Harner and I think Angie Arian was there that night. So it was a luminous crew.
A luminous crew, and yes, to be a fly on the wall. And you're right. It's it's lost to the ethers. It's not recorded. But I just really want to honor your role in being a lot of the community creator. Because that Ralph was not doing that. Ralph, that was not his forte. It was never going to happen. I've been in your home. I've been at your dining table. I know the work that you do and how you facilitate all of that. You were the community creator, and that's where things are so valuable. Is that it's not all collegial, relationships. It's we're friends, we're trusted allies, and we have each other's back, and that's that's all the difference and that's why everybody said yes
Yeah.
to it's Ralph's legacy, but your legacy of creating that's why everybody said yes. I want to do this for you, to create this book for Ralph. So I really want to honor and acknowledge that.
Thank you. I mean, it's also a blessing for me because since Ralph died, I realized I built that community. So it's not like
Hmm.
the friendships died when he died. I mean,
Exactly.
the friendships they were there in a certain form and they've just continued and gotten richer and deeper and, you know, um, in so many ways. So,
Oh,
it was an
absolutely.
ongoing gift for myself, even though I didn't even realize it at the time.
Well, and you continue. I mean, I continue to sit at dining room table with friends and people, this from the psychedelic community that you bring together. So you're right. You built it. It's yours. So, okay. So speaking of these luminaries, all right. Any noteworthy tripping stories with any of these people?
Really, only one with Terence McKenna when Ralph and Terence first discovered ibogaine.
Hmm.
It was their first journey and mine too. So
Hmm.
we all three tripped together and
And where were you? What was the
we were
setting?
the setting was we were living in Fairfax at the time. So it was at our house in
Mhm.
Fairfax. And I think we all had an amazing trip. I certainly did. I had a really amazing trip. And
So did you engage everybody eye shades on? Like what was it, music? Do you have a memory? That was a while ago.
hmm, I think we had eye shades. I don't remember the music.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm sure we collected ourselves, together initially, but it wasn't like Ralph's other circles where there was
No,
like in
right.
a formal intention. I mean, this was more like, okay, this is really an experiment. They were
Right. We
just
got
going
we
to
got some new
do the
stuff. Let's
best.
try it.
Right, right,
Right.
right,
I've been there.
right,
Not with you, but in my own.
right. So anyway, that was really memorable. I had a vision that night of this African goddess that just like sort of came down like a sort of like a tornado. And a couple of days later, Ralph said, "Oh, that's Oya." And then he bought me this book about Oya, the goddess. And so it was always like sort of he'd say, "Oh yeah, she's the tornado goddess." And but
That was
anyway,
his nickname, wasn't it? He called you that sometimes.
yes, he did. So,
Although I don't see you with tornado energy myself.
well, you know how it showed up? He would describe it. He'd say, when she's going to do something, she just like she'll get everything all spread out just like a tornado, and then she cleans it up, like she does.
Do
Like
tornadoes clean things
so,
up? I guess they do.
I don't know. Like I do it. I guess I do it with
Whip it
gusto.
into shape. I think you whip it into shape. How
Shape.
about that? That I know about you. So, Ralph came out of, he was part of the famous Harvard trio of trippers, Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, and Ralph Metzner. Were the ones who brought psychedelics to Harvard in the early days. So, can you tell us about your own experiences with Timothy Leary and Ram Dass? And can you share with us what you know about how Ralph held those two relationships as they all went their separate directions after leaving Harvard?
Well, he did stay in touch. I mean, frequently in touch wasn't really Ralph's way. It was usually if there was some reason or somebody needed to reach out to another one. We visited Tim just one time. They had an event in Los Angeles. It was shortly after we were married, and so I was in Tim's house with his then wife Barbara and Zach Leary, who was about 15 at the time. And then, of course, Ralph was close. And then just before Tim died, Ram Dass and Ralph and a few other friends from their circle gathered at Tim's house. It was like the farewell gathering.
Right.
I didn't go to that. But Ralph he always revered Tim. He always really appreciated Tim. And he kind of bristled at people's bad mouthing or people's angst about Tim because he just always thought Tim was really so brilliant. That was really it. I mean, I think he liked so he was really closer to Tim than Ram Dass. But of course, because Ram Dass lived so much longer, he had more interactions over those years with Ram Dass. And then Ram Dass lived here in the Bay Area, so I think they brushed shoulders. And Ram Dass was part of the international transpersonal conferences, which Ralph, and then when I came into his life, I was part of too. So one time I developed these youth conferences for those international conferences. And just before Ram Dass's stroke, about 2 months before Ram Dass's stroke, I had engaged him to present a session with the kids at the conference. So that was very sweet, kind of
Hmm.
working with him on that and being with him on that. Yeah, then once Ralph went and I went to Maui and we stayed at Ram Dass's house in Maui and had a weekend with him. And Ralph went there a couple other times maybe. So they were collegial. In fact, Ram Dass called Ralph when there were some people that were going over there to talk to Ram Dass about a research project, and Ram Dass called Ralph and he said, "I need you to come." He said, "I don't know a thing about this." He said, "You, I need you to be here." So that was interesting. But the night before Ralph died, he actually talked about in this liminal state who he was going to see on the other side. And Leary, he named Leary. There were 4 family members and then Larry.
Hmm.
And I was just kind of shocked by that. I thought, wow, that really shows the connection, this
Yeah.
deep connection between them. I thought that was pretty amazing. Yeah, soul brothers, I mean, in a certain
Soul
way.
Brothers,
And
definitely.
I mean, just the way the whole thing came about. And I'm always interested to keep reading about, the story and putting all the pieces in place and
Mhm.
who did what when and other connections. I just I just finished reading Being Ram Dass.
Uh-huh.
It was fascinating for me to read Ram Dass's rendition of those early 60s, and I learned a few things. I learned a few things, just in terms of sequence and how certain things came together.
Well, I mean, it was a fascinating puzzle, and they all held such disparate pieces of that puzzle that if you didn't know the connection, you would think that they were. It's like that story of the three blind men with an elephant. One's holding the trunk, and one's holding the tail, and one's holding the leg, and it's saying this is what an elephant is, and yet they all came out. They all knew that they saw that that psychedelics was the greater elephant, but they went in such disparate directions with it. It's really fascinating, and they each held such prominence in the different directions that they went.
Right,
Um,
right. I
certainly,
think the thing,
yeah.
that they had in common was they were all daring
Hmm.
in their own way. I mean, they were sort of fearless. They just had such exploration energy inside of them all. I mean, I could see that reading that book with Ram Dass. I could just see, wow, that's so strong. And it was so strong
Yeah,
in Ralph, and it was so strong in Tim. That overrode almost anything else.
yeah. The adventurers, yes,
Right.
explorers,
Yeah. Yeah.
seekers, definitely. Well, let's talk psychedelics. Do you have an idea of what Ralph's favorite medicine was and why?
I don't know for sure, but I think I'd have to say I think it was Jaguar.
Hmm. And
Um,
so that would be 5-MeO DMT.
right,
That
right.
was Jaguar was Ralph's name for it.
Yes,
And he actually wrote a book with that in the title.
right.
As he
The
wrote
Toad
about
and the Jaguar.
5-MeO.
And I
Um,
think it might have been
yeah.
because, for one thing, it puts you in kind of a death-like peaceful state. And he
Hmm.
always felt like that was one of the big, great values of psychedelics, was to kind of have a sense of what death is like and not be fearful of it.
Hmm.
And but also I think he felt like it was very, it was so short acting that he felt like you could mine a lot of material out of it in a short amount of time. So he liked working with people and with that.
Well, so I want to be specific about how Ralph worked with 5-MeO DMT in an early group with him, very early in my work with him. He brought it out, and it was, I think, the first group that he had done it with. It was definitely like, all right, he brought in, there was another participant in the group who was familiar with it, and he brought him in. He was a doctor, and he's like, he's actually going to be the one who's going to lead this. I haven't. And we were vaping it, and we had a big crystal ball vaping device, and we went one by one, and everybody held space. I very much remember that experience. It was incredibly powerful, and there were things that I very much took in and still resonate with myself today. He very quickly moved beyond smoking 5-MeO DMT and moved into snorting it. And I think that's his greatest contribution,
Mhm.
is that because the different modalities there are, the use of that medicine is really different, and as a result, he used only synthetic 5-MeO DMT, not from the toad, because you don't want to snort the toad because it has poisons in it that burn off when you smoke them, but not when you snort them. People, okay, so don't snort the toad. But the difference, was like 15 minutes versus 45 minutes. Rocket ship versus driving your Tesla really, really fast. And so the ability to take in and actually bring back the messaging of the snorting was, and that was, I think that's really Ralph's contribution to, I think he was the main contributor of that. I mean, in his book, in his groups, of using the medicine that way. It's a profound difference
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
use, and both are profound uses of the medicine, but it's a profound difference in how to use that medicine, and I really
Mhm.
credit Ralph with that.
Mhm.
So what's your favorite medicine and why?
I think it's got to be MDMA. I mean, I just sort of always keep coming back to that. It's just the simple, warm, heart opening feeling that is great to tap into. And yeah, kind of there's nothing like it.
It's a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
Hey, fellow explorers. Thoughtful planning and preparation is the foundation of any successful psychedelic journey. And if something does go wrong, knowing how to navigate that difficult space is essential. That's why I wrote my psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. It's filled with tips and tools for keeping you and your friends as safe as possible. You'll find it at our website, psychedelicdivas.com. Please go get it, read it, and share it. The more we all know, the safer we can keep each other. Thanks.
Well, so I mentioned that we were both very lucky to be part of a 12-year women's psychedelic group that ended a few years ago. What made you say yes to that invitation? And what did you feel were the most valuable aspects of that group?
Well, I think there were several things that made me say yes. One is that it was well structured. So it was solid. It had some kind of ground rules, some, I don't know, commitment aspects. It wasn't just all over the place. That part felt good. A main thing was I felt like I really, as Ralph's wife, that psychedelics was his work. It wasn't really mine, but it was important for me to do it. And so this women's group actually was a way that I could do my own work and sort of do it in tandem with him, but not with him, which was totally different. And then a third thing was that I do like groups. I like that connection. I like that deep connection, that deep bonding that happens. And at the beginning, there were only two people that I knew, you and one other person. And
The leader.
I didn't know anybody else, but that's kind of, I've always thought that's what makes for a good group when a lot of people don't know each other, but then you know a few people because there's enough of a familiarity there to build on. And, it's not all new, but a lot of it's new. So I don't know, that part appealed to me too.
So I know you mentor students who are part of CIS's psychedelic training program. So what would you tell them if they asked you, so what are the critical components of creating a good group experience? From what did you learn in our women's group, as well as from what you know about the groups that Ralph created? So with that knowledge, how would you answer? What are the critical components of creating a good group experience?
Okay, I'll answer that. And then I wanted to circle back to you and ask you why you said yes to that group.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
But I think that, okay, that was one thing that I think that some people that know each other within the group and then some new people, that makes a good group. Structure, intention, like why is this group forming? Like, kind of being clear on that. This is what it is. That means this is not what it is over here. Equity. I feel like one of the things that made our group work was just that everybody kind of shared in the tasks, the food tasks, the fire tending, it wasn't like one leader doing everything and then other people. It was very shared.
Right. We all learned. We all learned how to build a fire. We all learned how to build an altar. We all learned how to. Some people. I learned how to cook. Some of you all already knew how to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was actually several people in the group like that, I think, who grew in their cooking skills. Like another thing that really worked about that group was just the communication in between, like the connection. Like it wasn't just like, okay, just show up at that time and forget about it until the next time. There was different sisters would reach out if they had something to celebrate or if they had some particular need or, something serious they were going through. And everybody would kind of rally around that. And that also continued to build the connection and the interconnection between members that made the group stronger. And so that also is an important component. I think that was true, at least from what I could see with Ralph's groups too, that, as people got to know each other and they would attend several times, I mean, friendships were built.
Absolutely.
And sort of a tapestry was woven.
Yes.
Of, interconnectedness that, continued to be nourished. So
that was a highlight for me. So I'll answer the question, why did I say yes to the invite to the women's group?
Yes.
I had already been part of a women's group For those of you who've heard my earlier episodes, know that I was working with a woman who was trained by Leo Zeff, the secret chief. And those were amazing groups. And that, that community, the connection, the work that we did, the sisterhood bonds, all of that was in place. And then that group ended. And I was missing that. So when I was invited into our group, that was a clear yes for me, because I had already experienced that kind of a connection, and definitely, absolutely wanted it again. And I trusted, I knew more of the people who were going to be in it than you did initially, and liked them all. And so felt the resonance of that container, like, oh, this is going to be good. I like who's here. And I trusted the leader, and it was an easy yes for me.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of it. So like what built a good container? I mean, Ralph held a very strong container, and that made it possible for everybody to relax. You weren't worried. You didn't have to have an antenna up. Like, like, oh, what was that noise? Is someone taking care of that? Like, someone's crying. Are they okay? Everything was arranged and held. I don't think a lot of the groups these days have that same understanding or commitment to a good container. And I think it's something that absolutely needs to be taught in the psychedelic world. So it's something that you have to almost experience, like to have your body just relax and be like, oh, this is what a good container is. Got it. This is held.
Mm-hmm.
This is held well. And I will say to any of our listeners, if you're, considering a group experience and it doesn't feel safe or right to you in any way, then that's probably a no. That might be an indication that the container is not going to serve you. So I just want to honor that your intuition in saying yes to these kinds of things. Yeah, please lead with that.
There's something else I just thought of too, is that, this group, we did it in Ralph's style, sort of, and much more or less. And that included sharing, like not oversharing. There was a certain structure, but, we shared our experiences. I mean, we had integration was really important part of it. And then even during the medicine circle, there was some sharing, a little bit of sharing, just so that it wasn't just each person's private thing and they were left to their own. It was like there was a collective energy there that was also important. And it was deep work. I mean, so it's like you get very bonded easily, when you're doing very deep sacred work with people. I mean, with a small group of people. So
Yeah,
that was beautiful.
it was. So I know for me, one of the things that I valued in our group was that your generosity in doing mini astrology readings for each of us the day of our deep dive journeys. So we were able to take that personal astrological perspective as part of our awareness into whatever work we were doing that night. Can you talk about how you see astrology and psychedelics fitting together?
Yes. I mean, it's interesting because my world is so colored by astrology and psychedelics, and they're both, very much beyond ordinary reality. That's an intersection, but together they're really powerful because they are that beyond the ordinary reality. So I think that, I always wanted to do it for people just because I think it's really valuable to just kind of know. They would be like mini readings, like,
Yeah.
15-minute type
Right.
readings. And I would usually ask people, what's the big question that's up
Yeah,
for
you
you
would
right
ask
now?
us what
Because
our
it was
intention was, what we were working with, so that
it,
the reading was focused, on that.
so it's focused. And I think it was another vehicle. It was a different vehicle, but another vehicle for people to say, yeah, this is my intention, or this is my question, and to get the astrological information. And then the medicine would also give information. And much of the time they would map onto each other. So it was just, in a way, it was another enhancer of the experience and the knowledge that was gained from the medicine. And I just think Well, I mean, partly for me too, it's just fascinating. Always fascinating to see how something is going on and how it manifests and what it looks like.
Yeah.
Uh, and how positive, things that can be sometimes scary or difficult or challenging in ways that I think, I mean, you can probably attest to this, but I have a way of, not making it scary, not saying,
Right.
oh, like,
Right.
it wasn't doom and gloom. It was like, okay, here's the potential in this, here's what you can learn
Yes.
or do it. Here's how you can empower yourself with this particular energy. That's really
Well,
powerful.
I just know that pretty much every time in the integration circle, one or more sisters would reference back to the reading and then tie it into what they had been shown. So I mean, it was a very it was a very powerful connection that people were making. I mean, not maybe every time, but certainly it was showing up in a way that was helping guide and create and shape intention for people's direction, futures, whatever their question was.
Yeah. Yeah. I consider it good fortune because not very many people actually know enough about both to put them together, but I have the good fortune of working with one person for quite a long time, who's an underground therapist and has been wanting to learn astrology too. So has been really studying it and trying to work with it. And then I work with her. And so in Ralph's style was always to get, the biography from somebody and their intent around their intention. And this person has that biography and knows what the issues are. And then we look at the horoscope and I can help shape and guide, what the potential is there for the kind of the healing potential, and the questions that might need to be asked. And so, and then I get the feedback. So for me, it's just
Right.
fantastic. It's like because mostly as an astrologer, you don't really get the feedback about what happens or where this goes. So it's great just on an intellectual level for me to know. But what I've known and seen over time is just how incredibly powerful that combination is. It's almost like it potentiates it, or it
Yes.
takes it another level. Or sometimes there'll be like the person will come in with thinking they have a certain issue or a certain thing they want to work on or a certain their way of being. And I'll look at the horoscope, I'll say, well, no, that's not really the issue. It's really this, I think, or it's really, or, oh, they can take this, or no, they don't have to stay like that. Or there's these ways that, that with that extra astrological knowledge, you can help to shape that journey so that it's even more powerful. I guess that's what I would say.
And I would say that was true for me with doing those little mini readings. So I agree. That's why I brought it up. I think it's actually a really cool thing and an important thing to weave into if you're preparing for a deep dive psychedelic journey. I think it's a wonderful thing to get a reading of sort of like where you are, where you're headed, ahead of time. So I'm promoting the practice. So, in your essay in the book, you wrote that Ralph's legacy was one, to honor any vision, dream, message from the divine and act on it or manifest it. Two, always take the high road interpersonally, morally, spiritually. Three, to always practice forgiveness. And four, to practice the expansion of consciousness through first setting an intention, second, giving it attention, and then to expand into awareness. And you mentioned that he had a mantra posted around the house: intention plus attention equals awareness. So, my question is, what was it like to create a life with someone who was committed to these ways of being?
Well, the first words that came to me was, it wasn't easy.
Yeah, I know that. Y'all, we're all honoring Ralph here, but he was not easy.
He wasn't particularly, sweetness wasn't that was not who he was. That was not what for the most part. And if there were feathers that were ruffled or I was in angst about something, to say things like, you're responsible for your own consciousness, which is kind of like, okay, oh, okay, all right. like nobody's going to help me out here. Nobody's going to make this easy. Like, okay, I have to, it's on me. So I'd say, in a way, it's almost like all those things, like all those things you just read, it's like to be his spouse. I mean, I also had to step up to the plate. I mean, I really had to, I wasn't pampered, let's just say. You know, I was, there was a lot that was expected to match his energy.
Yes.
And not that he would ever think necessarily that he was demanding, but it was like, and also he was so high functioning, you know, it's like he would get an idea in his head and he'd be on a roll to manifest this idea. And I go, okay, you know, like I have to sort of be there. I mean, you know, like, or he's going to be going on down the river with this. So yeah, it was high energy, but you know, I think it was basically really good. You know, it's like holding forgiveness in a high regard. I mean, we always, you know, that usually happened pretty fast if we had anything to forgive each other for, because that was a strong value. And and I think one of the things I really appreciated most about him was just his integrity. I mean, he always took the high road. You know, he wasn't petty if he had any angst or disagreements, or you know, he didn't really like something, he was never petty about it. He just kind of could let it go. I used to actually marvel when I was early on in our relationship, and because I was his student and his colleague for 4 years before we were in a relationship, and I used to marvel at how he would forget bad things that would happen. Like somebody would do something, you know, to him that would, I mean, other people might hold a grudge forever. He'd just forget. He wouldn't even remember it maybe a few years, you know, a few months later. Like, oh, that happened? Like, so that's
Well,
pretty remarkable.
I will second the high integrity, and I will say this for me personally, as some of the other legacy psychedelic communities have come under scrutiny for some pretty serious indiscretions. I always felt relieved that Ralph held such a high integrity, tightly woven container in his psychedelic groups. So I'm curious, what was Ralph's perspective around some of the more, shall we say, loosey goosey ways that he saw people holding psychedelic space?
You know, if he had any experience with it, which he did, you know, with a couple of people, he would actually be in a group or with that person, and he would just go, "Oh my gosh, like this is really terrible or not good." And he would just express it to me. I'm sure he expressed it to anybody else that, you know, wondered about it. It's not like he, you know, wrote an article or put it all over the internet or
No,
anything.
no.
He would just kind of let it go. But he would definitely be concerned. Yeah, I guess that was it. I guess he knew his lane, which that would be one other thing I would know. I think that, well, I don't know if I necessarily learned it from Ralph, but I think we both were like, okay, you know what? Like we have these petty tyrants in our lives, or, you know, people that weren't in integrity, and it's just like, okay, it's not my job to fix that. It's
Mhm.
just, it's over here. I'm recognizing it, but
Right.
not, I'm not doing anything. And at the same time, you know, Ralph was also a very positive and trusting person in a certain way too. Like he wouldn't enter into something assuming that somebody was going to be shady or not do a good job. I mean, he'd go into situations expecting the best, and then sometimes he would learn that that wasn't there, and then he would usually just kind of leave it. He just he just call it out for himself or his close friends or colleagues, but not,
Mhm.
he wouldn't
Yeah.
make a big deal about it. And he was forgiving. You know, I mean,
Mhm.
he also had a kind of a intellectual way of holding everybody. Like, okay, oh, that person's like this, but it wasn't really judgmental. It was just more like, oh, okay, that's how they are. He
Yeah.
could let go
Okay.
of it easily.
Yeah. Well, so let's go back to Ralph's groups. While Ralph certainly held a tight group container, which I've already spoken to, one of my favorite aspects of Ralph's groups was that he also shared so personally. And in the book, Roger Marsden talked about his men's group. They invited Ralph to lead a circle for them. And Roger writes in the book, in that first circle, he wanted to model radical openness. Most of us were new to this format. And when it was time to do a first round of sharing, he went first and shared the story of the loss of his son. It was a powerful share and left little room for superficiality. He did not give directions, he set them by example. And that was certainly my experience. Ralph always modeled the level of integration that he himself would speak in the integration circles. He participated fully in everything that he asked the groups to do. And, in Ralph's style, he was leading us with guided meditations. And he would often intersperse very personal stories, sometimes painful stories, in service of our learning, what he had learned from these experiences. So I'm curious because, Ralph was trained as a psychologist at Harvard. And, I'm guessing that he was trained not to share such personal things in a therapeutic context. So do you have any idea about the process he went through? How did he decide to, when he was, working in the psychedelic space, to also open up and share his own personal story, which I'm so glad he did because it was invaluable.
I think it was in the spirit of modeling, like Roger was saying, that he was modeling, and also he was sort of setting the setting in a way. He was setting that energy, that intention for everybody else to share deeply by his own sharing deeply. Also, probably just because in the psychedelic space, I mean, everybody's more open, and Ralph, as you've told me in the early days, took more of a dose in the groups than later, but he usually had at least a little tiny bit of the medicine, so that he was kind of sharing that
He was in the
without,
space. He was
losing
in the
it.
field. Absolutely. Oh God, no. In the beginning, he always took less than we did, but in the beginning he took more of the less. And it was better because those boundaries were relaxed. And Ralph was a very boundaried private person. And so when that cloak of propriety came off, we got to see and feel, I think, the Ralph that you knew, the real, whatever the real Ralph, as close to whoever the real Ralph was. I think that's who showed up in the room. And in his later years, it was getting, it was harder for him to do all the medicines, et cetera. And he cut back, and the boundaries came up. And I really noticed a difference in the quality of his guidance. It was still valuable and brilliant, but the relaxation was missing.
The relaxation and the trust, maybe.
Yeah. The flow.
Yeah.
It became more professorial and less master of the cosmos. So there was something about that I so value from the beginning days.
Well, as you're speaking to that, I'm thinking about his childhood was so difficult in the war, and he was sent to boarding school
in Germany. So Ralph was in Germany during World War II, and then go ahead.
Yes, from 1936 to 1945, and then boarding schools where he was without family. And then he was in a boarding school in Scotland, not in his native language, the only German in a Scottish boarding school. He was a serious academic. That's kind of how he got through his sort of the trauma of it all, I think. But that was the way he kind of coped with. I mean, there's kind of a rigid, serious, intentional coping style there. Yeah. Then he gets to Harvard, and all the
first he went to Oxford, also boundaried.
Right.
Then
Harvard, way more open. So there's
Harvard in the 60s.
Like those both. You can see a lot of very different lighting styles there within that person. Also, it makes me think of in the book, several people referred to the session that was had right after 9/11. I guess that
I was there. I was in that one. It was a week long in New Mexico. Yeah.
And it was like probably scheduled for that weekend. I mean, just a few days after 9/11.
Right.
And
we weren't sure we could go because of the planes not happening. We all had to change our flights. It actually worked out really well because we were all coming in on different flights, the ones from the Bay Area. And so now we were all in connection and community. We knew who was coming and we were able to all be on the same flight and then rent the car. The airport was empty. The Oakland airport was empty. We were on some of the early flights out right after 9/11. So yeah.
Yeah. So just reading that, I thought, several people referred to the fact that they contacted him right afterwards. Oh, surely we're going to, cancel this. And he goes, nope, we're not canceling it. We're going to deal with it. This is what's happening in the world. Mm-hmm. We're going to go right into the eye of what this means for all of us. And
it was so powerful. It was amazing.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. I wouldn't have.
And he, whatever he was scheduled. And by the way, so this was a week-long experience. So with multiple medicines, something different each day. And Ralph would have had it all planned out. We're going to start with this medicine, and we'll do this meditation, then we'll do this medicine, and da 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 da. And he changed it drastically. I don't know what the original intention was, but he flowed right with that and had us look at the meaning of it and the consciousness of it. And it was really powerful. So Ralph did so much writing and teaching about death and dying. Can you tell us a little bit about his own death and how he embodied those teachings?
Yeah, I mean, he was really just about a perfect example of what he preached, he practiced. I mean, even the way he just courageously faced the illness that was terminal and, it happened sooner than he thought it was going to, but still, he was very courageous about facing it, even when he thought he had much longer to live. And a couple of weeks before he died, he was in the hospital. And I remember hearing him say to a nurse, to a doctor, actually, he said, I don't want to die, but I'm not afraid of dying. I thought that was pretty poignant and right on. And one of his last acts was he had this compulsion to get his library settled. And his library was going to Purdue University. And Sophia, our daughter, and I were packing up the boxes. And I was kind of joking to myself. I thought, because he was so intent on this. I thought, what is he going to do? Die as soon as as these books are all settled? And like the night before he died, I showed him, I said, okay, all the books they're all packed up. They're all shipped except for 8 boxes. I've got them in the car. They're going to the post office tomorrow. I showed him the empty shelves. He just put his hand together. He said, oh, I'm so grateful. And then he died that night. I mean, that was, that was one thing. And he elected not to take medicines that would keep him alive longer. I mean, he just thought he didn't want to do that and kind of go through all the side effects and everything. So I guess that was another thing. He just got everything settled. I think as soon as he was diagnosed, he started going through his files and clearing out his client files. That's the first thing he did. And he prepared. So he didn't leave he told our colleague, Diane Howe, he told her, Kathy's going to be really, really surprised when she sees that my files are all cleaned out. Besides his client files, he cleaned out his files. I thought, actually, I wish he'd left his files. Right, they would have been interesting.
Right. Well, yes, that actually. So we tried to capture some of Ralph's meditations, and the regulars, like there was a couple of people very intent on this, and they bought little recorders and a microphone, and and Ralph didn't really like having the technology there, but he was like, yeah, okay, I get the value of this, I'm going to do it. And so there were all these recordings, and they weren't going to be great quality, but they're gone. He cleaned them out. We can't find them. You can't find them. Like everyone's like, where did they go?
Right. I still think they must be somewhere.
That would be awesome. Okay.
But yes, we haven't found them. So,
A little
it,
too thorough.
right, exactly. Yes, yes. In some ways, a little too thorough. Yeah, yeah. One of the things he didn't throw out, which I'm grateful, is he has all of his letters to his parents from childhood until
Oh,
really
uh-huh.
until the invention of the computer. Those are fascinating to read. I mean, I've been reading through them and
Oh, that's beautiful.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at
Wow.
least he didn't throw that
A
away.
time capsule. Perfect.
Yeah. But, then he just died a very peaceful death. I mean, it was so peaceful. I took photos of his hands because they were so amazing, and they just had this sense of like peace, a complete
Nice.
peace and acceptance, surrender. Oh, and the other thing is the book, the Ho'oponopono prayer, and the little
Yes.
booklet that
Uh-huh.
has the 4 different
Yeah, the 4 sentences, the 4 phrases. I'm
4
sorry.
phrases.
Please forgive me.
Mm.
I love you. Thank you.
That was the only book he had around at his bedside for the
Mm.
last couple of weeks, and he just thoroughly kept kind of reading those and affirming all that. Oh, and he he tried to make contact with anybody that he knew that he kind of needed to say goodbye, or he had some feathers ruffled or something, and then things like he handed me a couple days before he died, he handed me a note. He said, "Here, call my massage therapist and tell her thank you very much. She's been great. I've really appreciated it." And like things like that just, so it was
A
kind of,
death well done.
it was a death well done. And then also, this was interesting to me. Like the night before he died, he he kind of wanted to clean up around his bedside, and just various things like Kleenex and pencils and a few things like that. And he just said, "Here, I'm done with this. I'm done with it. Take this back." And so his space was totally
Hmm.
clean around him.
Nice. Yeah. So before we go, I want to talk a little bit about Ralph's books, because that more than anything, I think, is his legacy. And there's 24 books, and you've worked to bring some of them out, some of the outer print books back. So for someone who's just learning about Ralph's work, where would you start them?
I would start them with his book, The Unfolding Self,
Mm-hmm.
because it has 12 metaphors of transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of everybody can relate to that. Caterpillar to butterfly, death is transformation, concept of the journey, like just various things that are in everybody's life. And but yet you really get a sense of Ralph through that, because he's got such a great depth of knowledge about Eastern and Western traditions, and sort of interweaving everything, and you'll get to know his whole cosmology really through that book.
Perfect. I'll give a shout out to Allies for Awakening, since this is a psychedelic podcast.
Yes.
That was Ralph's
Yes.
sort of. It's short, and it's something he created towards the end, and so it was sort of like a synthesis of this. This is how you trip.
Right.
This is how you enter the space. This is how you work and navigate it. So I would say I would call attention to that one. And so, what's the best way for people to find out about Ralph's books? By the way, is it through Green Earth Foundation, or I mean, there's Amazon, but like, how does one do a deep dive in Ralph world?
One, through this book. I mean, this book really is
Oh
a pretty
yes.
deep
Oh,
dive,
without
because
question.
it really covers all aspects of his life. And it has
Yes.
authors of essays. I mean, even going back to one of his fellow grad students back in Harvard, and his brother writing about his childhood, and psychedelics, eco-psychology, death and dying, creative. I mean, one of the things Ralph did is he always encouraged people's creativity. So there's some of that in the book. And then there's a list of the 24 books that he wrote in the back of that. But
Perfect.
also you can go on Amazon and find most of them. They're not quite all there, because there's some that are out of print. And
Right.
that's one way. Green Earth Foundation is his website. It's www.greenearthfound.org. And that,
And it's going to be in the show notes as well, people. So, and then Cathy, how about you? How do people find more about you?
they can go to my website, which is cathycolemanastrology.com. And
And by the way, Cathy does a free weekly astrology blog, which I can highly recommend. So you can access that through her website. Cathy, thank you so much for being with me today. It's always a joy to hang out with you, and I so appreciate you.
Thanks, Carla. It was great. It was great. Wonderful to be with you.
Well, and thank you all for listening and for being on this growth journey together. I know everyone asks for you to subscribe and rate and review their podcasts. And I know you're multitasking while listening to this because I myself, I'm walking the dog when I listen to podcasts. But if you could just stop and navigate your way over to the 5 stars, it would mean the world to me. Your support helps amplify these important conversations and grow our community. And we live in a world of algorithms, and they must be fed. So, sending you all so much love and appreciation for taking the time to be part of this community. And I will see you all next time. Cathy, thank you.
Thank you, Carla.